Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the Agentic AI Bootcamp. I will be your instructor for today. First of all, I'd like to thank the huge team that put this together, including the Open Hackathons team and the Nurse team for the cluster support and all the prep in the lead up to this. Also, thank you to Krishna for putting this content together. With that, and then the TAs, the awesome TAs who are volunteering their time to help all of you today. So I hope you all have your cloned repo ready to go. So once you enter that, um, we'll go into the tutorial directory and then click on Start Here notebook. This is where we'll start. All the notebooks referenced here and linked here are inside the Jupyter Notebook directory. So, um, so to start off, some learning objectives for today. We'll start off with understanding the capabilities of NIMs, which are NVIDIA Inference Microservices. To use this is what you need the API key for. That's why you had to create a developer account if you didn't have one and create that API key. And then we'll go into MCPs and how to enable them at a low level and at a higher level. And then we'll create a stateful chatbot using LangGraph and with the NIM as a LLM backend and implement that to get some responses. And then apply these concepts in the challenge for tomorrow. So with that, let's get started with the first notebook. Hopefully you've seen this before when you were creating your API key. If you're still working on creating your API key, that's okay. The instructions are here, and they just went over them briefly. So make sure to create your NGC account and follow the instructions here to generate the API key and save it, as you will need it shortly. So to start off, we'll run through some of the cells in the notebook. You can hit Shift Enter if you're on a Mac, or you can hit Run Cells individually. So in the first cell, we will enter our API key. So I will do that as well. Don't want to do that. Let me switch my screen share real quick. So I'm only sharing the Zoom window. Apologies. Okay. Okay, just making sure you can see my screen again.
Yep, okay.
Okay, awesome. So I have my API key that I will paste here. And then we'll validate that we can actually hit the cloud endpoint. So what you're seeing here is the URL and the headers for the API payload. And then we get our response back. And we will print the response to make sure we were able to successfully access the API, the model. One quick note for today's, we will not use a local endpoint. Typically, you need a container to do this. So for today, we will only be using the cloud endpoint, which should make things easier in principle. So I will stop here for a second to make sure everyone is able to do this and is able to catch up. And in the meantime, if there are any questions, I'll take any questions.
It for this local endpoint is not needed even for the actual hackathon activities. We'll use only cloud.
That's correct. We can use the cloud endpoint. It's so I'll go over this in a bit, but essentially we're deploying NVIDIA inference microservice, which you can think of as a container that contains a model. We will only be using the one that's deployed in the cloud, and accessing that through an API. We can also deploy that locally, um, so you can access your own deployed version. Um, but we won't be doing that today. So to answer your question, yes, we can only rely on the cloud endpoint to do all of this, all of the labs and the challenge.
Thank
Kelsey? Hello.
Sorry, yes. Oh, what was the question
Okay.
again? Yeah.
And yes, so on my screen, it does not show the box. Ask me to. Okay, there's a word over there. It's enter your API key, but after that there are dots. But there's no box. Ask me to. I can put my API key over there. So what happened? Will you move up?
Um, so for that, maybe it might be more useful if a TA can um, take that question in a breakout room.
Okay.
Yeah, would you be
Oh,
able
okay.
to
Yeah.
post, yeah, would you be able to post a
Yeah.
screenshot on the cluster support channel? And then we can go ahead and take a look and see what's going on.
Okay.
Oh, and then someone mentioned in the chat as well a solution, so please try that out.
Okay. Sure. Okay. Thanks.
Awesome. So just to get a temperature, are we all good? Are we able to connect to the cloud endpoint? Thumbs up.
Sorry, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
I think I managed to do what we're supposed to be doing, but I could use maybe a little bit more discussion on what these individual blocks are doing. I can kind of guess from the code that's there, but maybe it would be even more useful if I can just have just a little bit more discussion.
Yeah, of course. So we start off here. These are just instructions in Markdown, and then this is just importing the needed libraries, and then we're setting up our API key as an environment variable. That is necessary and a precursor to actually using the endpoint, which uses the API key in this cell here. So these are just some simple Python libraries to use an API, to call an API. And essentially, we're setting up the URL and the header, which also sets the API key from the environment variable in the previous cell to authorize that. And then we set a payload to send in that request to the cloud endpoint. And here we specify the model, the message, including a simple question, what is 2 plus 2? And some other parameters that the model needs. I hope that was helpful.
Definitely, it was. Yeah, thank you.
Yep. And then subsequently, we get the response, which we print here. Awesome. So let's move forward. We will be skipping over the local endpoint. So this lab should be fairly short. That said, I do have a challenge for you all. Let's scroll down. So if you scroll down to the initiate a quick test, what we're doing here is we'll test our NIM in the cloud endpoint using a LangChain NVIDIA endpoint. So the examples you see here are for doing this with your local endpoint. Obviously, if you run those cells, they will not work because we don't have a local endpoint. So my quick challenge to you is if you can figure out how to replicate this with the cloud endpoint that we already have, where your API key is already set up. So maybe take a few minutes to see if you can figure out, and then we'll go over the solution and what I have. So let's reconvene 45 after the hour.
That's good. I'm sorry, Vineet. Could you please repeat again what the task was?
Yes. So what we are seeing here is we are trying to access the endpoint, either the cloud or the local endpoint that if we set up a local endpoint. The example that you're seeing here is accessing our, if we had a local endpoint, this would be the code to access that local endpoint. Since we skipped and we are not setting up a local endpoint today, the task is to change this so that you would use chat NVIDIA library to access the cloud endpoint.
Perfect. Sounds good.
Feel free
Now
to
I
use
think,
any LLM or any tools you need to find the solution and come up with the solution.
yeah, not seeing any questions coming in. I'll go ahead and open up the
Yep.
breakout rooms. And how long did you want them to spend on this task?
Should we go breakout rooms? Sounds good. Let's spend 5 minutes. So maybe we go to 50 after the hour.
Okay, perfect. And for the next 5 minutes, please focus on this task, and then we'll go ahead and close the breakout rooms right afterwards.
So the assignment was instead of accessing, the code is set up to access a local endpoint. We need to change that to access the cloud endpoint.
Okay, and
Yeah. And I think everyone's back, so I can share my screen and go over the
yeah, I
solution.
think that would help you.
Yeah. Do you see my screen again?
Yes, we did.
Awesome. So again, this is set up to use a local endpoint, so we can just remove this part and just access the model. This does require your environment to have your API key, so that is a prereq. But since we already set that up in the cells above, your API key should ideally be in your environment unless you cleared um, your um, your environment or you restarted your server. So we run this. We get an answer back. So and we can change this to something else like and we get a response back with the answers. So awesome. Is everyone good? Or were you able to try this?
I still have the same questions I had in the breakout room. How is this example different from what we did in the first cell? I think that would be useful context for the participants.
Yeah, of course. So what we saw in the earlier in the cell above was where we were setting it up and manually in a more verbose way hitting the endpoint using some basic libraries in Python that are available in almost any Unix-based system, right? So you probably don't have to do much installation or anything. But we're essentially achieving the same task using the LangChain library, and this is just setting us up to use LangChain in the later notebooks. So this was a simple example to achieve the same exact task as in the initial cell.
Thank you. That is helpful.
Yeah. Andreas?
So I'm able to run the cell that is underneath Cloud Endpoint, but when I run the first cell at the challenge under Initiate a Quick Test, I'm getting an error each time. So I entered the URL of the Llama 3.2 model, but it just doesn't run. It runs when I use the local endpoint, though. So
You mean the other way around?
yeah, I
Because
can run the
we,
local endpoint. So if I remove the base URL argument from the chat NVIDIA call, it works. But if I use a URL, https build.nvidia.com, meta, llama 3.2, and so on, then it does not run, and it just gives me an error saying JSON decode error, expecting property name enclosed in double quotes.
so we can just use, we don't need the full URL. We can just specify it this way.
Okay.
Yeah. Does that help?
Let me just try that.
Yeah.
So you suggest just removing the base URL argument?
Yep.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah. So that's all you need.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I probably won't be able to say your name correctly. Irakli?
Yeah, that's pretty correct. This
Okay.
is actually the same question that was before. So
Okay.
maybe the question was different, but so there, if we put the URL that we used before when we, posted our request to in the beginning, so that URL, so this request doesn't go to that URL, or why does that not work? Like
So
the base,
yeah, let me undo. So this URL,
yeah, well, this
it's
is local,
spec
as you said, so it doesn't work because
yeah,
we don't have a local one set up. That's right. But if for the
right.
base URL, we put the URL that we posted our request in the first test, then it doesn't work, which tells me that this chat NVIDIA doesn't go to that URL, or do you know what I mean? Like in the beginning, we have URL, this integrate API, NVIDIA, blah, 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 to which I believe we posted our initial request.
It does work. You just have to remove the chat/completions at the end. You only provide the URL through V1.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that makes it break. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Thanks for the answer. Yeah.
And just to clarify, when we use the more minimal version that doesn't specify the URL, that's just because we're using this, I don't know, chat NVIDIA class, and that is hard coding that in there for us by default.
Exactly. So this library is built for NVIDIA endpoints. It's yeah, in the back end, it abstracted away that it knows what server it needs to access to get the model.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Awesome. If there's no more questions, I'll move on to lab 2. Perfect. So let's go to lab 2 and we can talk about MCP. I know we're running a little ahead of time, so feel free to stop me, or if you still have questions, we can still talk about them with lab 1. So I'll just give it a minute before I start on MCP, just to make sure we're all good.
I have a question related to the curl
Yeah.
example, just following the cell. I tried to add the authorization, which is required. in the curl example after this cell. There's one, yeah, just after
this curl request.
Yeah, I tried to replace the URL with the one we have used in the very beginning. And it requires an authorization option to that, but I don't know how to do that to make it work.
So yeah, so we will also skip this cell because this is built for accessing a local endpoint,
Okay.
which would not require authentication.
I see.
I don't know off the top of my head how you would authenticate with the curl request, but I'm sure there's another flag we can set to actually, if we look at the earlier example, we should get some clues.
Okay,
So
got it.
maybe inserting that would do the trick, but I haven't tested that. So
Yeah, thank you.
yeah, again, going back to there was another question earlier about what's the difference. This is essentially abstracting away some of the functionality in a basic curl request, right? And then and further on, the LangChain NVIDIA endpoint library is abstracting more information away about the endpoint, the URLs, etc. So
I'm
awesome.
sorry,
Let's
can I ask a
yeah.
question? I kind of missed the explanation of what you changed at the end by taking out the URL. Can you do that one more time? I'm so sorry.
Yep. So just taking out the base URL will, and the explanation to why this works is that the chat NVIDIA library has abstracted away the functionality that it knows the URL for NVIDIA NIMs and where they're deployed, which is why this works. So just specifying the model allows it to go look for that model in the endpoint in the cloud.
We need one question. How does it know
And
which particular profile for that model to look into?
What do you mean by profile?
Um, I
Like the
think
user authentication?
uh, I think throughput is one example, right? Um, yeah, let me come back on that.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, ask your question, Tom.
oh, I was just saying if we have the base URL there, that's for the local endpoints because it doesn't have that information. That's why you need to kind of specify it. Is that correct? I just want to make sure I understand this.
That's correct. That's correct. Exactly.
Thank you.
And the reason why we're still specifying the model is because that gives chat NVIDIA library information about the model, even though it's deployed locally when you're accessing a local endpoint. In the earlier version where we're specifying the local endpoint, but not in this one, it uses this to access the right model endpoint.
Yeah. In theory, you could have multiple models running simultaneously locally.